Chapter 13. Tuesday morning, Nick sat at his computer typing his report regarding his meeting with Howard Keeley. His phone rang. Reaching over, he picked up the handset.
"Yes, Mara,"
he said.
"Sheriff Moran, Brett Auger's here to see you."
"Send him in."
Nick said, hanging up. Just like before, there was no time to prepare for Brett Auger's visit. Nick had a feeling Brett knew the effect he had on people, and for some reason enjoyed popping up uninvited to watch them squirm in his presence. The door opened.
"Good morning, Sheriff."
Brett said with determined steps to Nick's desk.
"Morning. Have a seat."
Nick said, trying to be civil even though he knew it wasn't working.
"I hope I'm not interrupting anything."
Brett said, looking at the cell where Howard Keeley lay asleep on the cot.
"I see you're getting the riffraff off the streets. Good for you."
Brett turned back to Nick with a grin.
"What can I do for you?"
Nick asked dryly.
"I told you I'd be back to hear the progress you've made on the case. So, what can you tell me? Did Agent Stone give you her update?" "I spoke with her briefly last night. Now I'm here to confer with you. As I told you before, we're following several leads." "Still being vague, huh, Sheriff?" "You and I are scheduled to meet tomorrow. You caught me on my way out." "I understand completely. It's not like you're just sitting around keeping an eye on this one guy all day."
Brett laughed.
"I'll see you tomorrow."
Brett said, heading to the door, not caring if Nick said goodbye. Once Brett left, Nick went online and got the telephone number he needed. Picking up the handset, he dialed. The phone rang 3 times before his call went to voicemail. It would have been too perfect to have actually gotten through. Now he had to wait for the beep after the lengthy message before he could leave the reason for his call.
"Hello. This is Boyd County Sheriff Nick Moran in Callahan, Texas. I'm calling to speak with the Senior Director of the Special Investigations Division."
Nick continued with the pertinent details as well as a brief reason for his call. The hanging up of the phone awoke Howard Keeley. Getting up from his cot, he walked over to the cell door and stood peering at Nick through the bars. It hadn't been a full day, yet the scruffy stubble about Howard's jawline made him look as if he had been incarcerated for weeks.
"Do I at least get some breakfast?" "Yes, you do."
Nick said, going over to the kitchenette. He pulled a carton of milk from the mini fridge and an individual box of cereal from the shelf along with a bowl and a spoon. While he prepared breakfast, Nick could feel Howard's heavy stare upon him, making sure that Nick did it right. Howard returned an appreciative nod as Nick pushed the tray through the small rectangular-shaped opening in the cell door.
"What time is your guy making the drop-off?"
Nick asked, watching Howard shovel one spoonful of cereal into his mouth after another.
7:30. Why?
Howard asked, wiping the milk that hung from his lower lip with the back of his wrist before shoveling in another spoonful.
"I'll let you out at 7 o'clock so you can make the pickup." "For what?"
Howard paused.
"I need you to receive the package." "You're not using me to set him up." "That's exactly what I'm going to do. Now eat your breakfast. I have some errands to run. I'll be back before lunch."
Nick said, grabbing up his keys and radio. Then he left. After assuring Myra that he wouldn't be gone long, Nick decided it was a good time to go see Michelin. There was no indication that she would be there when he arrived, or that she wanted to see him, for that matter. But it was a chance he had to take. Nick pulled into the parking lot of the Grable Motel. With quickened steps, he went up to her door and knocked, preparing himself mentally for all the things he wanted to tell her. But now that Nick was given the chance, he couldn't think of a plausible reason to explain why he was there. Rethinking his decision, Nick turned to leave when the sound of the door opening stopped him in his tracks. He turned back around.
"Nick, what are you doing here?"
Michelin asked. On most days, the greenish depths of her eyes were a distraction for him. But today, it was a whole package, from her perfectly shaded crimson lips to the soft auburn curls that hung past her shoulders, not to mention the pair of jeans and lime shell that accentuated her long, shapely curves.
"May I come in?"
he asked, gathering his composure. Reluctantly, Michelin stepped aside. Seeing her open suitcases sitting on the bed, he stood for a moment, feeling numb, hurt.
"Were you just going to leave without saying goodbye?"
Nick asked as she closed the door and returned to her packing.
"Not exactly. I wrote you a note,"
she said, tossing her items into the suitcase.
"Is it the same note you were writing in the car?"
"No, this one I actually intended to give to you."
"So, where is it?"
he asked as if it really mattered. "I had a little trouble getting started." Michelin said, wrapping the cord around her hairdryer and putting it inside the suitcase with her other things. Then she turned to him. How did things pan out with Howard?
As you know, Fisk and I brought him in. He's still in custody.
Nick said, confused by her concern for the case. Did he tell you what you needed to know?
Not really. Look, I don't want to talk about Fisk or Howard or anybody else for that matter.
I'm sorry, what do you want to talk about?
I don't get it.
Nick chuckled in disbelief.
First you tell me that you love me, and now all of a sudden you're leaving? Not only that, you practically ignored me and the kids yesterday at Marty's. What's going on?
You were with your family. I didn't want to intrude.
There's more to it than that. Does Brett know you're leaving, or is this his idea?
It was mine. I think it's for the best.
Why? Because it's easier?
Sheriff.
Nick.
He corrected her. Nick, I think you're a wonderful man. But I can't work under these conditions.
What conditions?
You know exactly what I'm talking about. That thing you do when you look at me. The quiet way you talk to me. It's all too distracting.
I'm distracting? Seriously?
He laughed.
So tell me this. How do we go from you finding me distracting to you telling me that you love me?
I'm sure you had a really good laugh at that one.
To be honest, it caught me off guard a little bit. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I love you too.
No, you don't. And my telling you that was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. She went over to the window where she stood with her back facing him.
Michelin, I don't just say that I love someone in that way if I don't mean it. I said those words to my wife not nearly as much as I should have. Probably explains why the last time I told her it was the day before she left me, 4 years ago. I haven't wanted to tell anybody else that since.
And I'm just supposed to believe that you love me? She turned, facing him.
I'm not asking you to believe anything.
He walked over to her.
But it's how I feel. I know I should have told you before.
Why didn't you? Better yet, why would you love someone like me? We're totally different.
I know. You think I'm some simple country bumpkin sheriff, and in my eyes you're this annoying, opinionated know-it-all who for some reason I can't stop thinking about. The feelings are there, and they're not going away because I don't want them to.
You really think I'm a know-it-all?
The biggest one I've ever met.
He said as she smiled. Seeing the mood become less tense between them, Nick eased his hand around her waist and pulled her closer to himself. Breathlessly she sighed, resting her forehead on his shoulder. Nick could feel the rapid beating of her heart mingling with his own. He couldn't think straight. He needed to be with her. She had to know that. Lifting her chin, he gazed down into her eyes, searching for the words she wasn't ready to tell him. Nick, she whispered as a tear surfaced the rim of her eyelashes.
What is it?
He asked quietly. I can't do this. Her voice broke as she pulled away. Just go, okay?
I don't understand any of this.
Nick laughed as he walked over to the bed where he sat, unable to tell if her mixed signals were some kind of sadistic power trip used to control and manipulate him. He couldn't tell anymore. It's not you. Her words cut into his thoughts. I'm just no good at relationships, and having a one-night stand with you is something I can't take.
I never said I wanted a one-night stand.
What else is there? I'm leaving after this case is over. She sat down beside him. Nick returned a peculiar look.
You weren't just telling me how you felt. You were telling me goodbye. Working together was your idea.
I didn't count on developing feelings for you, but I should have seen it coming. How could I not?
If you leave, Brett will send someone else. I don't want that. I agreed to work with you.
You did, didn't you? She asked softly.
Yes, I did.
I'm really sorry that you came by.
Why?
Because now you know the mistake I was about to make. Nick cracked a smile.
As far as I'm concerned, this never happened.
I'll see you at the office. Michelin smiled, placing her hand gently upon his as he closed his fingers around hers. He drew close and kissed her lips. Then he left. Later that afternoon, Nick sat at his desk trying to throw himself into his work. However, Howard's constant complaining about being cooped up all day in his cell made it difficult to concentrate. The door opened. Nick looked up as Michelin walked in. Could she feel the penetration of his gaze upon her? Perhaps she could, which explained why she stubbornly ignored him as she pulled out her chair and sat down at her desk. There she was, all buttoned up, concealed in her usual Sid attire. But what did it matter? Nick was all too aware that underneath her official layers was the lime-shelled babe he'd seen earlier. Hearing his chuckle, Michelin looked up at him. Her lips parted as if she was about to say something, but Howard cut in instead.
What do you need?
Nick asked Howard impatiently.
I said I'd like to eat now.
Nick looked at the clock. It was only 3:25 p.m.
You'll eat at 5.
Nick said. Howard fumed, hitting the bars as he returned to his cot where he lay down facing the wall. A cell phone rang from inside Nick's desk drawer. He pulled it open. The ringing was coming from inside the plastic bag containing Howard's personal effects. Taking the cell phone from the bag, Nick saw the number on the caller ID. It was just a hunch, but he had a feeling whoever was calling him had something to do with the case. Grabbing up a pen, he scribbled the number on a memo pad before taking the number to Michelin and laying it on her desk.
It's for you.
Nick told Howard. Howard got up from the cot and walked over to the bars.
If it's Rex Skinner, be sure to keep your appointment for this evening.
Nick handed Howard the phone through the bars of the cell. There he stood, watching and listening to Howard as he took his call.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Howard said, pacing back and forth.
No, that's not possible. Something else came up.
His eyes fastened on Nick. Howard said, ending his call and handing the phone back to Nick.
Who was it? It was a kid I was supposed to meet tomorrow. Who's the kid? I don't know his name. He goes by Scully. Names aren't important in this game.
Howard explained.
Why were you meeting him? I've got some merchandise to move. He was going to do the job. What kind of merchandise? The merchandise that you took, okay? The deal's off. Now I've got to tell Rex and it's going to be my head. No.
Nick sounded.
Call Scully back and tell him that you changed some things around and you'll be meeting him tomorrow. And if I don't...
Howard looked Nick square in the eye.
Let me put it this way. The people at Callahan are tired of this problem. Judge Strader is willing to do whatever it takes to make this problem go away, which is why he agreed to this arrangement. If I don't help you, the deal's off. Is that what you're saying? I think you're finally getting the picture.
Nick returned a determined stare.
Give it here. I'll call him.
Howard sighed heavily as Nick handed him the phone. Nick said nothing as he watched Howard dial Scully's number. Back and forth, Howard continued to pace as he discussed the details of the meeting over the phone.
It's all set,
Howard said, handing Nick the phone once again. Nick looked at the clock. It was a few minutes after 4. He couldn't arrive at the center late again. He needed more time to talk to Mike about the sports equipment he had planned to donate. Nick closed up the file he was working on and tossed it in the basket on his desk. Are you leaving?
I have to go check on the center.
Hearing disappointment in Nick's voice, Michelin came over to his desk and sat down on the corner, facing him. Nick couldn't help but notice the silky smoothness of her long, shapely legs. Did she honestly have to wear that skirt? She was such a tease. Nick decided as he cleared his throat, trying to stay focused on what she was about to say. What is the appointment you want Howard to keep?
He needs to pick up a package Rex is dropping off at his stepsister's house.
Sylvie didn't sound as though she wanted him to come back.
We've already talked about it. She's expecting him.
Is there something bothering you?
Why do you ask?
Nick asked, looking up at her. I don't know. You seem so straight to the point.
Isn't that how you wanted it?
I need time, Nick.
I know. But in the meantime, were you able to find out anything on the number I gave you?
According to my scanner, the call Howard just received came from a cell phone number registered to Jacob Larson. Nick had heard that name before. After racking his brain, it finally came to him.
You're saying Howard was just talking to Jacob Larson?
Yes, and apparently he goes by the name Scully.
That kid goes to Chase's school. I almost arrested him last month for speeding. He had a few priors, nothing excessive. I let him off with a warning.
Because he's Chase's friend? Michelin asked as if she already knew the answer.
I doubt they're friends, but they know each other.
Well, if you play your cards right, you'll get a second chance tomorrow.
Yeah.
Nick sounded distracted. If you're having second thoughts, I can call Brad and request a team to take over this case.
Why? So you can leave that much sooner? Or is it because you think I can't handle it?
She paused with a sigh. I'll worry about you.
That's very sweet.
Nick smiled. I'm not trying to be sweet. This meeting between you and Howard and whoever this guy is could be dangerous. Not to mention the guy you're meeting with tomorrow. What if they have guns?
Michelin, I have a gun too.
He chuckled. It isn't funny, Nick. The thought of you getting hurt is more than I can deal with right now.
I've been doing this job for 10 years. I know what I'm doing.
This is different. Besides, I didn't know you then. Michelin said, motioning to get up. Instead, Nick got up, stopping her. Seeing that Howard was still facing the wall, Nick leaned close and touched his lips upon hers in a kiss. I've got some work to finish. she said, pulling away and returning to her desk.